So welcome today. My name is Jill Summerlot, the webinar coordinator with InSource. I have two very special guests with me today. We're going to have a discussion on understanding disputes in special education and really what the very importance of this for parents' perspective to be made. We have with us Angela Baisley, and then we have Bruce Colwick, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. I am going to let them introduce themselves. They are going to be doing this presentation today. Please, again, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in our chat boxes, either on our Facebook Live or on our Zoom platform, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. As of right now, I am going to remove our QR code. It will be put back up at the end of our presentation, but I am going to turn the presentation over to Angela right now. Thank you so much, and I will mute.
Well, thank you very much, Jill. And we really want to extend our greatest debt of gratitude to InSource and all the participants today to give Dr. Baisley and I an opportunity to talk a little bit about a study that we're engaging in and give you some information about that. And then first we'll do some more formal introductions. So the name of our study is the etiology of special education disputes, fancy way of saying the reason for them. We've been working on this study for, oh gosh, Angie, I don't know, probably 12, 13 months at this point. So we're kind of hopefully approaching the end of it, but we're going to talk a little bit about that here in the upcoming slides. Again, I'm Bruce Kulwicki. I'm the director of the Bloomberg Center at Indiana State University. The Bloomberg Center is a special education outreach organization that's housed in the Bike College of Education here at ISU. We support several projects funded by both the federal government and the Indiana Department of Education. One of the ones you might be most familiar with is the Indiana IEP Technical Assistance Center. We also have the PASS project that we've had for several years and are getting ready to renew a new contract with the IDOE. That is supporting teachers getting out in the field for sensory loss licensure programs such as deaf, hard of hearing, and blind, low vision. We also provide lots of professional development to those professionals as well as educational interpreters. And we also are home to the federal project, the Deaf Blind Project here in Indiana, which provides support to families and individuals who have been classified as deaf blind. Angie?
Hi, yeah, thank you, Bruce. I'm Angie Baisley, and I'm the CEO of Unified Leadership. I'm an independent consultant who works with a variety of clients on special education disputes and collaboration. I was a special education director for 17 years. I'm the immediate past president of the Indiana Council of Administrators of Special Education. And I'm also a senior consultant with CADRE, the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education. It's our pleasure to be with you here today.
So with the study that we're engaging in, just ahead of before we tell you a little bit about what it's about and how we're engaging in it, we do intend to publish it. We've gone through the IRB processes here at Indiana State University that allows us to do that. And we went through all the requirements needed to have a study supported by Indiana State University. But most of all, we're looking at using the data that we collect from parents and those in the field that work in the field of special education to inform system improvements that we might collectively feel are needed within our profession. So the core beliefs that we had before engaging with this study and also now that we understand that special education is a civil right. We also look to improve the process. We must do so while preserving the rights for children and their parents. And we feel like collaborative relationships are essential to best meet the needs of our students with disabilities in the school setting. And also being a former special education director myself for 17 years, we are always looking at ways that we can resolve disputes at the lowest level appropriate. That does not mean we're trying to avoid or we are against we're not anti-litigation. We understand that there's a place and a time for due process procedures, and they're highly necessary to make sure that we protect that right at the very top of our slide here, that special education is in fact a civil right. So what we found as we've engaged in this study so far, it's been more difficult for us to get as many parent participants as we would like to. And we feel like without that, we don't have a robust a study as we need to look at this problem collaboratively. So we feel like having parent perspective is essential to any theory of action we come up with out of this study and what we might want to do with the results. Protecting civil rights for children. We want to have a collaborative type of advocacy when we engage the powers that be about potential change within the field among the professionals working in the field and the parents and the individuals receiving services. We want to understand all perspectives as we look at approaching solutions to the problems we have in special education today. And then we want our outcomes to be aligned among multiple stakeholders.
Absolutely. And thank you, Bruce. And thank you to Joe for allowing us to meet with you today. We had reached out to InSource to help to get our survey out to more parents. And when we did so, we provided a similar presentation for their staff. And then it was suggested that we provide this for parents. And we're so glad to be doing that today. Bruce has described a little bit about our study. I'm going to situate the context with some data and research here. So what you're seeing here is dispute resolution data from Indiana, for Indiana, and it's from Cadre. The hyperlink is in the slides, so you can look at it yourself if you'd like. The data dashboard on the Cadre website is super helpful to compare states amongst each other, to themselves, and the different types of dispute resolution. This first set of bars represents written state complaints, and this is reports issued from those written state complaints. This one represents mediation requests and mediations held, and this is due process hearing complaints filed, resolution meetings held, agreements made in resolution sessions, due process hearings that were fully adjudicated, meaning they were heard by a hearing officer and came to a decision, due process hearing requests that are withdrawn, dismissed, or resolved, and then at the time that the data was published, the due process hearing complaints that were still pending. You can see at the top that the colors represent the different years, and the most recent data that we have available to us through Cadre is the 21-22 school year. This specifically looks at due process hearing requests. You can see our trends in Indiana. We're trending up slightly. We're also trending down a little bit in resolution meetings, but we have some agreements, a little more agreements that are happening in that resolution period. Also, we see that it's increased a little bit on the due process hearing requests that are dismissed or resolved without hearings. And then we did see an uptick a little bit in the number that were still pending. So that was just a little bit closer look specifically at due process hearing requests. So recently in Indiana, there have been some practices to help the parties, schools and families, to address their concerns and resolve their issues. iChamp is the Indiana Department of Education's online system and portal that anyone can use to file for a state complaint, to request a mediation, and to file for a due process hearing request. So the online system has allowed the state to collect data and to look at trends over time. Also in 2017, our state legislature formed the Indiana Education Dispute Resolution Work Group. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and the outcomes of that work group. And in the last two State House sessions, there's been discussion around special education dispute as well, which I'm also going to talk about here shortly. So the work group was a legislative directive. It's to provide recommendations to the Department of Education, the State Board of Education, and the Indiana General Assembly. It was a representative group, and the full report outlines all the folks who were involved. There were about 12 official members of the group. And at the time, Joel Bonner was the director of InSource, as Dawn McGrath is now. And so Joel represented InSource on the work group, and I represented iCase. On November 1st, 2019, our group submitted a 7-page report. And the report had 9 recommendations that you can see here on the screen. First is that funding for any recommendations made by the group should not be taken from existing special ed allocations. We wanted to make sure to preserve the funds that are already available for students and not to use them to address any recommendations from this committee. Second recommendation was to enhance mediator and independent hearing officer training and evaluation, to continue to fund facilitated IEPs, to create a subcommittee to look at a survey, to look at how facilitated IEPs are working and to get perspectives of stakeholders. Also, a recommendation was a centralized clearinghouse of tools and resources that are available to families and schools to resolve dispute. The recommendations propose funding for Indiana disability rights and a subcommittee to study the appeals process and also study the appropriateness of non-disclosure agreements and settlement agreements. And then the 9th recommendation was that the work group may meet again. Currently, we've continued to see funding for the facilitated IEPs and some training of the mediators and hearing officers. But as this came in November of 2019, we all know what happened shortly after at the beginning of 2020. So not a lot of these recommendations have yet been implemented. So I'm now going to dig into the research. My dissertation and subsequent research, I have focused on special education disputes and collaborative processes. And so this is from published research across the United States. So the research tells us that there's systemic issues when it comes to special education disagreements. And also that it's really legally complex. And with that, there's a lack of training on legal literacy and also a lack of training on collaboration. Also, research tells us that trust between families and schools is essential to the process and can sometimes be what makes things fall apart. So systemic issues, legal complexity. Of course, this whole process is rooted in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which outlines a set of procedural and substantive protections for students and their families. And the procedural is kind of like the timelines that you're familiar with as a parent, and the fact that schools need to get your permission before they can do an initial evaluation and then implement an initial IEP. It's certain timelines that occur when there's discipline issues. So those are examples of some of the procedural protections. The substantive protections, though, is more about like what is your child going to get from the IEP? And within that substantive is the definition of FAPE, or free and appropriate public education. And so research tells us that the differing interpretations of appropriate make this work just legally complex. And then because it's complex, then there's clarifications that have been created in an attempt to clarify, but then it's made it even more complex. So for example, there are US Supreme Court cases, there are cases within the state, there are guidance documents, and sometimes those documents can be contradictory to each other. So procedural protections come from parents' more general rights under the 14th Amendment to due process and equal protection. And other examples are, here's parents have a right to access educational records, to participate in the IEP development, to receive a prior written notice, and to be meaningfully involved in the special education process. Those are just a few examples, definitely not an exhaustive list of the procedural protections for parents and students. So the procedural safeguards, Skritic is an author that suggests, are they a barrier themselves? And he kind of goes on to talk about that idea was originally brought together to further the rights for all students with disabilities, and that potentially the procedural safeguards have now shifted the focus to individual rights of particular students. And this has then created an individualized activism and a bit of a competitive environment that benefits educated and resourced families. So an unintended outcome then of this legal evolution is the loss of collective advocacy. Two of the really fundamental Supreme Court cases under IDEA are the Park, Pennsylvania Association of Retarded Citizens, and Mills case. Mills was a specific case. Those are the two cases that really set forth the collective advocacy. But over time, as the law has evolved, it's become a less of a broader joint effort and more of an individualized focus on students. So we've kind of lost that collective efficacy or advocacy and our ability to kind of look at systems together. So substantive protections, a lot of times policy conflicts and disagreements, they occur within the details, such as the educational setting, how to support students with disruptive behavior, and IDEA prescribed how decisions are to be made with all of the procedural protections, but not what decisions to make. So there's clarifications of increased complexity, given the individualized nature, there's a lot of differing perspectives are common. Courts are called upon to interpret what schools are required to provide. And then a lot of times the guidance is difficult to understand. And this can lead to uneven implementation and then a lack of specificity, which has led to disputes between parents and schools. So enforcement of the laws. In contrast to other civil rights legislation, Congress has left the enforcement of IDEA largely to parents, and this puts parents in a necessary position of power. It also has established at times an adversarial relationship between families and schools. So the systemic issue, when we look at the lack of training in legal literacy, with the constant changes in the law, it's difficult to keep up with all of the particular components of the legal issues. We know that school leadership plays a crucial role in managing and preventing disputes, and a lack of legal literacy for school leaders can exacerbate conflict. Also, a lack of training on collaboration for teachers, parents, all of the parties that are involved in an IEP meeting can contribute to misunderstandings and conflicts. Another systemic issue is the lack of trust between families and schools. Multiple studies highlight the importance of trust. Trust plays a crucial role in preventing disputes and ensuring collaborative IEP meetings. Mutual respect, clear communications, and shared decision-making are foundational to effective partnerships that prevent conflicts from escalating. So trust, what is involved in trust? Trust involves transparency and empathy and consistency to foster positive relationships. There was a study of mothers that reported that trust is built when educators demonstrate respect, competence, and a genuine concern for their child. So parents and schools' perception of the dispute resolution process. As Dr. Klawicki and I engage in our study, we're going to be bringing some new research to light on this. But first, we're going to dig in this case, to the research on these topics. Parents and schools' perceptions on the expense of formal dispute resolution processes, the negative impacts on relationships, and the emotional and psychological toll for all parties involved. So it's expensive. And here I'm speaking of formal dispute resolution. I've made a bit of a shift away from state complaints and mediation and facilitated IEPs. So as a professional, my heart is definitely in, as Bruce talked about at the beginning, our core beliefs in resolving disputes at the lowest level appropriate. And then for our study, we're looking at due process hearing requests. If we have more collaborative processes in the beginning, you would think that we wouldn't end up most times with a hearing request. So therefore, a lot of this study is looking at the whole process. We want to make sure and understand parents' experiences of the whole process. We're also specifically looking at the legal involvement in the litigation with due process hearing requests. So in a study in 2016, an author published that over $90 million per year is spent on conflict resolution in special education. And there's little empirical evidence that investigates the time and financial commitments. So in our study, we looked at this, and to talk about this and how we did this in our study, I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Klawicki.
Thank you. So one of our questions that we asked our special education directors, which is a part of one of the group of participants. We of course have parents and special education directors. So roughly we emailed all special education directors who had been involved in a due process hearing request for the last 4 years, I believe it was. So with that, we sort of had quote unquote a captive audience of folks that we were going to introduce this study to and send them a survey, and subsequently ask for them to engage in interviews if they chose to do so. But one of the questions we asked towards the end was if they weren't for the due process hearing request that they were involved in, about how much did it cost the district? And we asked for, them to include things like attorney's fees, the cost for the independent hearing officer, staff time, which is a little fuzzy and hard to collect data on, money for substitute teachers as school staff were preparing for the due process hearing, transcription costs, etc. All those things we asked them to include in their estimates. What we did not include and is a little bit harder to collect and kind of wrap your head around is the remedies for the decisions that came out of these due process hearings for tutoring, independent education evaluations, compensatory services can be very costly to a district, and those kind of things are not included in these numbers that we're about to show you. So we had it broken down, as you see to the left. Didn't expect each participant that we surveyed to know exactly to the dime what their district cost for each due process hearing request, but we broke it down into categories from $0 to $2,500, $2,500 to $5,000. You can see on the left, and then finally the biggest category was over $20,000, and there's a lot of play in there, and you can see most of the due process hearing requests that we received return surveys for went over $20,000. So when you do the averages there, you get about, for each due process hearing request, about $16,782.26, which is considerable, especially when you think about smaller school districts that may not have a lot of funding available for such a request, and can really be a little bit tough on the pocketbook for most districts, small or large. So what we came up with, and Angie did these, Dr. Balsley did these numbers for us. You can see the school year to the left and how many due process hearings were filed in the next column. Average cost is the one we just presented to you. And if you go over through the last 5 school years until we stopped collecting data, you total it all up and it adds up to about $8,407,000, which is significant. In many cases, that's beyond the operating budget for a school district for a year. So that can be costly. And again, the reason for us collecting this data is just another reason for us to kind of consider what we can do to avoid due process hearings if at all possible. One of the other things that we know about due process hearing requests through some of the research we did prior to engaging in our study, there is lots of research available that due process hearings frequently harm the relationship between parents and schools. We know that once legal action is taken by one side or the other, people tend to be hesitant to be collaborative with the other. So we know also that without that collaboration, the supports and services and what's best for students with disabilities is not going to run as smoothly and may be impacted for sure. Emotional factors, psychological toll. We also know through some studies that parents and school administrators and teachers as well are impacted negatively by dispute resolution processes, particularly due process. There's studies out there about the impact on teachers. We know that it contributes to burnout and reduce effectiveness, particularly if school staff are engaging in preparing for a due process hearing request. That takes some of the time away, educational, instructional time from the teachers to their students. So we kind of started with some basic research questions that we're most interested in finding out through our study. First and foremost, root causes of why the due process hearing was requested. We want to know this because if we look overall how we want to reduce things, we want to know what's out there that's creating disputes between parents and schools. What exactly was the straw that broke the camel's back that caused the parent to engage with the with filing a due process hearing request? Through knowing what the root causes are, we can kind of push some ideas and maybe some services into training for staff and parents if we keep seeing the same things over and over again. For instance, lack of personnel. We all know there's a shortage of special education personnel out in the field right now. And then kind of it's a vicious cycle, so to speak. The more dispute resolution processes that school staff have to go through, the more it increases burnout, and it probably creates less people in the field and leaves us in need of more staff to serve students with disabilities. We also most want to know efforts made by parties prior to filing. Did they engage in an additional case conference? Did anybody reach out to a parent kind of unofficially, not within a case conference, to see if they could resolve the issue? Did they engage in mediation? Did they try facilitated IEP when it was appropriate? What other things weren't tried before we went to the due process hearing request? And then once we get into those due process hearing requests, we want to know how participants feel about the process. Are improvements needed to be made within that world of due process hearing requests, all the way from the filing to the very end, however it ends? Are there better ways to do it? And then we just talked a little bit about what we wanted to know about the financial and time commitments for schools and parents and everybody involved. So mixed methods approach with our study. I alluded a little while ago to how we got information from special education directors. The IDOE provided me through an open records request a list of all the due process hearing request numbers filed within the period of our study, 4 years. And with that is the school district name. And with the school district name, I was able to discover who the director was during each of those hearing requests made. That allowed me to email each special education director involved with the survey, asking if they would care to complete it and what we're doing with the study. And we got very good feedback. I think we got over 105 return surveys from our special education directors. Unfortunately, many of them I had to send several surveys to, because the data that we collected was based on each individual due process hearing request. Okay, so we wanted to know how each one went. So it wasn't like one director could do one survey, because we were asking specifics about that particular hearing request, such as, was mediation tried before it? What was the reason for the parents filing? What other things were tried? And dozens of other questions we asked that could help us collect data and help us engage in the study and get all the information we could possibly need to write up our results.
Dr. Clokey, I think it's important that we state that we didn't receive any personal information on each of the hearings. We only asked general questions such as, was mediation attempted? We don't know the names of the people involved. We didn't see settlement agreements, nothing like that. It was just more generally about the costs and the process.
Exactly. So if if others that are listening today choose to engage in the study, if they qualify to do so, you'll notice right away that our initial question is rather long, and it does state all the facts that we won't be collecting any individual data on anybody. We don't know the name of any of the students or parents. The only way we might have the name of a parent is if they choose to engage in an interview, and that's at the end of the survey. If they had been involved in a due process hearing request, if they'd filed one, then the survey takes them to whether or not they would like to have an interview with myself. So the survey to parents of children with disabilities kind of went out in different avenues. ARC of Indiana, InSource has put out once for us. But because of that, and people are busy, or maybe lack of understanding, which is what we're trying to clear up today, we didn't get nearly enough surveys from parents, in my opinion, to really engage in the survey. So one of the big reasons why we're here today is to see if we can get our survey out to more parents. So we need the perspective of the parents. It's critically important because we intend to publish this. And if we want a theory of action, what we might do with the data and how we might improve systems of special education within Indiana, we need to hear from both professionals in the field as well as parents of students with disabilities, so we can have a collaborative sort of action towards the powers that be and the decision makers that might be presented with this information. So what we're really asking here, you can see sort of I think InSource, or we can provide this in different formats. It's designed to go out on a Facebook post or Twitter or X or whatever you call it, with a QR code. And that QR code that you see on this page goes to a page here at the Bloomberg Center on our website that gives you instructions about this study. That goes to a page that talks about why you might want to engage. And then the additional QR code on that page will take you directly to the survey. There's also a link, but you can also take the survey on your smartphone or on a desktop if you use the link. So our question today to participants and to InSource: how can we connect with more parents to understand their experiences and perspectives? We're hoping the opportunity we've been given today can help get the survey out there. Anybody listening today or anybody that visits InSource's Facebook page should have access to a way to take the survey. So we'd appreciate it. We'd also appreciate the fact that we can get more people to interview. So far, I've interviewed about 6 or 7 directors and 2 parents. And they were very interesting and engaging interviews, and they don't take very long. So we're hoping to get more participation in both surveys and interviews.
And before we open it up to discussions, we definitely wanted to give special thanks. Go ahead, Dr. Klawicki.
We want to thank all the directors and parents so far that have engaged in our study and our survey and participated in interviews. Bloomberg Center, I'm the director there, and Dr. Brad Balch is the dean here at the Bayh College of Education, and he supported this study and kind of got us collaborating. Angie and I and Monica Conrad of Lewis and Katz, a school attorney. Indiana Council of School Attorneys also deserves thanks. Of course, InSource and Indiana ARC, who has thus far been very helpful in getting our survey out, being supportive of what we're trying to do. Also at the IDOE, Nancy Holsapple and Zaretta Ward Holloway, both of the IDOE have been very supportive. Nancy is the special education director at the state level, and Dr. Ward Holloway is also, oh gosh, Angie, she used to kind of, I knew her when she was investigating complaints, but I think she's got a different role at this point.
She oversees all of the dispute resolution through the Department of Education.
And finally, Dr. Janet Decker, who Angie and I both had as a professor and a dissertation chair at Indiana University. She continues to be supportive, and she's just a wealth of knowledge on special education law and dispute resolution, and she's been very supportive of our project as well. We couldn't do a lot of things without Dr. Decker. I know Dr. Bosley would agree.
So this is our final slide, and we want to open it up for any discussions. Jill, if there's information in the chat or the Facebook feed, and we went ahead and put our graphic back up there. And then I know, Jill, you'll need to, I'll stop sharing here momentarily so that you can put yours up. But you tell me when you want to switch screens. So that's
Okay.
the end of our formal presentation, now open for discussion.
Well, and I want to thank you so much for doing this today. That was very informative. And I want to open up both platforms to anyone that does have any questions. If you're on our Zoom platform, please feel free to use either the question and answer box or the chat box. If you're on our Facebook Live platform, please feel free to utilize that with any questions or comments that you may have. We will have this recording placed onto our YouTube channel. And so for anyone that is listening on this in a recording, please feel free to use not only InSource's QR code, but please access this QR code that you see on this screen right now so that you can go and get that information as well. And as you heard from our presenters today, there is that call out for parents so that they can have those interviews. And I highly encourage you to become a part of that, especially if you have been in this arena of any sort of dispute resolution that's going to impact this study. It's definitely any sort of dispute resolution is a stressful time for parents. And it's also one of those times that you really need to keep that line of communication open. And so any help that you can receive and any of the study that will be able to help in the future would be very much advisable.
Jill, I did want to point out that a parent doesn't have to have been through the dispute resolution processes to take the survey, because part of our questions are to understand parents' understanding of their rights, so that if there were to be a need in the future, does a parent know what a facilitated IEP is? Do they understand how to participate in mediation? So it would be appropriate for any parent in Indiana that has a child with a disability to participate in our study.
Yes, we don't want just folks that have been through the due process request, due process hearing request process. We are most interested in kind of the basics, because again, when we hear in the survey, parents don't understand what the notice of procedural safeguards are, but don't have a good understanding of Article 7. That's information we can give out to school administrators and special ed directors about where we need to start. In some cases, it's ground zero. And while we're waiting for questions, I kind of I almost interrupted Angie when we are back a few slides, when we started talking about the importance of trust between parents and schools is critical. But I also started thinking about some of the barriers to trust. And if you think about, imagining, being a parent of a student with a disability, and you get your first team together, and then there's lots of collaboration and lots of hope for success in the coming years with meeting goals and things like that. But then sometimes you think about the way our schools are set up, it's almost a barrier, because sometimes the next school year you got to start over with a new team, and then it's a whole different ball game when you leave elementary and go to middle school, and then you go to middle school to high school. It's really kind of just the way our schools are set up. I don't, have any way to fix that, but it really takes some work. It's not just, okay, I trust you, you trust me, and we move on. It has to be built over a period of time, and every 9 months you're doing it again. So we really need to think about that a little bit, because a lot of what we saw in the director pieces, the director surveys, when they talked about one of the reasons, several parent reasons, because things kind of fell apart when they changed buildings. The services that the parent was expecting to carry over from the elementary school didn't, and it should, but that created some conflict, and maybe a little bit of extra communication before those moves from one building to the next, one grade level to the next, are important. Maybe we think of transitions a little differently, not just from high school to adulthood, not just from first steps to preschool, but maybe we get, at least informally, some kind of transitional pieces from grade level, from building level, because that trust is hard to come by. And you go from being a parent with a child in an elementary school, or a first grader that's got 20 kids and one teacher, and the teacher knows them all well and communicates well. And then you end up in high school and you've got a set of 7 different gen ed teachers that see about 200 kids a day. So our system's not really set up to kind of establish long-term collaborative, trust-based relationships. So that's my 2 cents on that, but I don't know how we fix it.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, because, one of the things that InSource does work with parents and strives to keep those lines of communication open, and to keep that, those relationships really intact. But you're right, when you go from school to school, or, from an elementary to a middle school or to a high school, and if you're in any sort of larger school corporation, I mean, my family was very blessed. Our son went to a very small community school corporation, and everybody knows everybody, but that's not how it works every place. And so you do have to start over every 9 months. And, for a parent, and let me just kind of give you the parent side of this for just a second, you have to re-explain to a lot of people the diagnosis, the disability, what they can do, what they can't do. And sometimes that becomes very daunting, and almost to the point of, I just don't want to do this no more, because I'm tired of having this same conversation year after year. And it's not of anybody's fault. It's just how our system does work. And so it does become very tiresome, really, to have that conversation and have to rehash a lot of those things that you really would like to not have to worry about. But if you don't have those conversations, there's going to be a lot of things that are missed. And so you have to just continuously do that. And that's why it's so important to have that relationship. And if you have a system that you work with, that if you have a swinging door of administrators, or of, any of that things, that's another layer on that you're having to start over again and again. And so it does become very daunting. But again, having come from a very small corporation, we were very blessed in the fact that everybody knew everybody, and we had very little turnover, but we'd had different teachers of records. And that is the same thing as going through and having to re-explain, because the teacher of record doesn't know that child. And, then we have to look at every single IEP. And, you're talking 200 IEPs for some teachers of records in larger school corporations. And it's just overwhelming. And I don't mean to drone on, sorry.
No, and I think it's really important. It goes back to what I was talking about with trust. It's just, and as a parent, and you're having to re-explain all those things, it probably ends up going more leaning in the direction of a discussion about what the student can't do rather than they can.
Right.
And those aren't, it's always better to look at what can be done and how we build on that. But unfortunately, maybe school personnel are more worried about, okay, how is this individual not going to fit with what we do here? So it's just a whole kind of mindset of looking at it more positively. So, and I don't think the trust issue is really anybody's fault. It's everybody's responsibility. But, as a parent, if you go from one teacher of record to the next, and even if it goes perfectly, and you have the same one for the elementary and the same one through middle school and the same one through high school, even if it goes perfectly, you're just naturally going to click with one better than the other. And it's really nobody's fault. It's just human nature. You just click and trust some more than others. But it really is something I think we need to take a closer look at. And maybe our study will help us with that, because I really think that the trust issue, even though we talked about it today, it's huge in all endeavors of human nature. So.
Right. Yeah, and I do agree with that. And I really want to thank you for correcting me on the survey that it's open to everyone.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for that. I just had it in my head that it was just for the one parents. But so if anybody is listening again, either on the replay or you're here now, please understand that survey is for anybody.
Yeah, the way it's set up is if the parent checks a box that says they participated or it had been involved in a due process hearing request, that it sends them to another part of the survey that asks them if they'd like to do an interview. So we are interviewing those that have been engaged in due process hearing requests. But the survey's for everybody. We want to get a general idea of, let's just say, since I'm a former special education director, and Dr. Balsley is as well, we want to know how we're doing at ground zero, and provide this information to our special ed directors that are part of this study and out in the field that didn't participate in the study, just so they can know, a bunch of our parents are saying they don't understand the procedural safeguards. They don't understand the processes. They don't know what to do when they have a complaint.
Right.
And we all know that you can't just hand that document to a parent or a staff member for that matter and expect them to really comprehend it, and know what it means and what it's for. So seems like a lot of, and I think a lot of districts are doing a lot better with that. But we're still seeing, would like to see more about what parents have to say about just the support they're given from the people they're interfacing with at the school level.
Right. And I will tell you that is one of, whenever I do any sort of dispute resolution, any of our PowerPoints here on this platform, whenever I do it, that is one of our biggest ones that people attend. And that's where a lot of those questions come from. And that's also where a lot of the private questions come from afterwards, because of just not wanting to be out there that they have a question on even how to do stuff. So it is a very, it's almost intimidating if you don't have any idea what avenue you're looking down. So
Absolutely. And Jill, I wanted to thank you too for putting this on the InSource YouTube channel. We know how busy families are, and that, when we scheduled a time, there would be any number of families that were not able to join us now. So I love that you have that option. I did want to clarify that we're going to leave the survey open through probably mid-January. So if folks are listening to this after mid-January and they try to go to the survey link, it may not be available anymore after mid-January 2025. The reason is we want to finish our study. Bruce and I, both having been practitioners, don't like to just admire problems. We definitely want to do a good job with our study and get it published, so then we can work on that theory of action with the folks who can really bring what we're collecting into existence and into being.
Well, and so I have a question, and if I've overstepped, just say, Jill, you've overstepped. After all of this data is collected, will you be able to come back with a presentation to tell us anything about what your findings are, or maybe what the future might kind of hold for something like this?
We'd love that. Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
I know that we're hoping to be able to do this at Spring ICASE, at least be done. I don't know if it'll be written and published, but at least done with all the data and enough for us to talk about what we found, even if it's not published yet. But we certainly want to do that. Spring ICASE is in February, so it's not very far away. But I think but we've been working on the other things that we can work on. But we really, 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 really need this parent data to make it really robust.
And actually, Joe, we've slowed the whole study down in order to get more parent data, because we just feel so strongly about it. We already have the director data that we will collect. It's just we don't want to push forward until we feel like we've got a really good sample, and we hear from parents too. So that's the reason it's been a little bit slower for us.
And I do understand parent participation because that is one thing that we as an organization do struggle with too, is getting parents to participate. And it's just timing and getting them at their convenient time, because we know that parents
Absolutely.
are, just so busy.
Exceptionally
But,
busy, yes.
I do
And
see that there was a comment that was put in our chat box, but you did address that. So thank you so very much for that. I don't see any other questions or comments that are posted out here. So
I think we can wrap this up and then maybe it's a little bit shorter posting on the YouTube channel.
I
okay,
think, is that the same? It looks like something else popped up on the chat.
Oh,
right. It says, is there a way to find an alternative for our in-source reps that don't jump to complaints when parents don't agree with the school? I'm not quite sure what that means.
Good.
Well, the in-source is to the liaisons are only there to support the parents and to provide information to the parents and to the school. And we're kind of like that bridge. We should be that bridge between the parents and the school and the school and the parents. And we really strive to make sure that when we talk about any sort of dispute resolution or complaints, that we are discussing the lowest level possible before you jump to that next level. And, if parents don't agree with the school, there is a way to agree to disagree respectfully. Okay. So please understand that there is, if you're a parent, there is a way to do that respectfully, and that you really should be doing these things at the lowest level possible. But if you have any other questions that are in-source related, I will be happy to help you with that if you want to get a hold of me after the webinar.
I would always be able to say that my experiences with in-source liaisons as a director and as a teacher, they almost fit into the category of lowest level possible when we have disputes. They very much have supported what's best for the student in every case. So I haven't had any bad experiences myself. Anytime that a complaint was filed in my district, for the most part, it was deserved, and we handled it the way it should be handled, transparently. And I think that in-source really helps that in most cases. The transparency of the school district, what they want to do for the student with disability, and the parent, and the collaborative nature has always been fortified when we had an in-source liaison within the case conference committee.
Well, and I do appreciate that, because that is definitely what we do strive to work towards, is that collaboration. I did put my email in the chat box if anyone is needing it, and you're entirely welcome. So at this time, I am going to ask that I put our QR code up real quick, and then I will let everyone go so that they will have the rest of their day. So let me go
And while
grab
you're
it.
working on that, Jill, I will say out loud that I dropped a link in the chat to Cadre. There is a whole section of the Cadre website specifically for families. So to address that question that was asked about, when there's disagreement, there's resources for parents to help prepare themselves to meet with administrators, to prepare for the IEP meeting at that Cadre website. And as a former director, I'll say, always start with a conversation with the director. Request a case conference meeting. Those can be held any number of times throughout the year. It's not just the annual conference. And also, if you're not satisfied with the case conference meeting, ask specifically for a meeting with the director. Our research and other research says that oftentimes a director might not even know about the family when a hearing request is filed. When you work in a large district or you're part of a cooperative, a director may not know all of the families, unfortunately. So if there's concerns, directors are just eager to, meet a parent for coffee and talk about it, and to try to work through the issue together. So that would be a definite option as well.
And I do have to agree with that. I've been here for 23 years, And out of all of that time, I have never had a director, I've never had any of those staff say, no, I'm not going to meet with you. They are very willing. They're very open about, let's settle this and, let's be able to move on, because everything that we do is entirely for the betterment of the child. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. And Bruce and Angie, please, thank you so, so much for being here. Whenever you would like to come back with your findings, please feel free to let us know, and I will put you on our agenda. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this today. We will be sharing the QR code of yours and getting that out there so that we can get more parents and hopefully get them to you.
All
Okay.
right.
So at this time, I am going to say thank you very much for being here today. It
Thank
is
you.
1:58, and please, again, use both of those QR codes, one for our sign in and our survey, and one to be able to access the information for the importance of that parent's perspective.
Also,
right.
if any of the participants want to reach out to me from the slides and have a question, that's perfectly fine. Call or email.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So at this time,
Thank you.
I am going to end our webinar. Everyone, thank you very much. Have a great day. And we will see you in probably about a week on the webinar platform here. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.